I wasn't supposed to survive that night. That's the first thing you need to understand before I tell you anything else. The men who dragged me into that pine forest counted me as a corpse before they even finished digging. One of them, the tall one with the scar above his lip, actually laughed when he kicked dirt over my face. He laughed, like he was burying a dog. I remember the laugh more than the bullet. My name is Raina Olson. I was 26 years old that winter, and what happened in those woods outside Caribou Ridge in February of 2019 is something I've only told 3 people in my entire life. 2 of them are dead now. The third is the man writing this down for me, because my hands still shake when I try to hold a pen for too long. So listen carefully, because this is the only time I'm going to say it out loud. The town of Caribou Ridge sits about 40 miles north of nowhere. If you've never heard of it, don't feel bad. Most people from our own state couldn't find it on a map. It's a logging town, or it was until the mills shut down in 2014 and half the houses went dark. By the time I came back home from the army, the population was somewhere around 400, maybe less. The kind of place where the gas station closes at 7 and the diner has the same 6 customers every morning. I'd been out for almost 2 years. 2 tours overseas, an honorable discharge, and a duffel bag full of things I didn't want to think about. I came home because my mother was sick. Lung cancer. The slow kind that gives you time to say goodbye but takes everything else with it. She died on the first Tuesday of December. I buried her on Friday. And then I didn't know what to do with myself. Our house sat at the end of Pine Hollow Road, about 3 miles outside town. My grandfather built it in 1962, hauling the timber down from the ridge himself. It was a small place. 2 bedrooms, a wood stove, a porch that creaked when you stepped on the 3rd board from the left. After Mom passed, it was just me and her old dog, a half-blind border collie named Junie. I should have left, I know that now. I should have sold the place, packed up Junie, and driven somewhere with traffic lights and strangers and noise. But I didn't. I stayed. I told myself I was sorting through her things. The truth is, I didn't have anywhere else to go. That's how I ended up at McAllister's on a Wednesday night in February. McAllister's was the only bar in town. It used to be called something else, Murphy's, I think. But a new family bought it in the 90s and the name changed. Inside it smelled like spilled beer and wood smoke and old fryer oil. There were 3 tables, a long bar, and a jukebox that only played country songs from before 1985. I went there because I couldn't stand another night alone in the house. That's it. That's the whole reason. I wanted to hear other voices. I wanted to sit somewhere where the silence wasn't pressing against me like a second skin. I ordered a beer. I didn't even drink it. I just held it. There were maybe 10 people in the bar that night. Most of them I knew or used to know. Bill Hanrahan from the feed store, the Peterson brothers, a woman named Doreen who used to babysit me when I was 8, a few faces I didn't recognize. And then there were the 3 at the corner table. I noticed them right away. You learn to notice things in the army. You learn to scan a room the second you walk in. Exits, hands, faces. You learn it so deep it becomes automatic, like breathing. These 3 men weren't from town. I knew that immediately. They had that look, the kind of careful, watchful look that men get when they're somewhere they don't belong. One was tall and thin with a scar above his lip. One was shorter, heavier, with a flat face and quiet eyes. The third was younger, maybe 25, with a baseball cap pulled low. They weren't drinking much. They were watching. I didn't think anything of it, not really. Hunters came through Caribou Ridge sometimes. Truckers, too. I told myself they were probably just passing through. I finished my beer. I paid. I left. That was my first mistake. The parking lot at McAllister's wasn't much. 6 spaces of cracked pavement and a gravel overflow behind the dumpsters. I'd parked in the gravel because my truck was old and I didn't trust the pavement after a freeze. It was cold that night. Real cold. The kind of cold that turns your breath into smoke and makes the inside of your nose burn. There was no moon, just a sky like black glass and a wind coming down off the ridge that smelled like snow. I had my keys in my hand. I was halfway to the truck. I heard the boots before I saw anyone. 3 sets coming fast. I turned. The tall one was already on me. He hit me across the face with something, I don't know what, maybe a flashlight, maybe the butt of a pistol, and I went down hard onto the gravel. My cheek opened up. I tasted blood and dirt at the same time. I tried to get up. The heavier one kicked me in the ribs. I heard something crack. Then a knee on my back, my arms wrenched behind me, a strip of tape going over my mouth. I'm telling you this part fast because that's how it happened. Fast. There was no time to think, no time to fight. 1 second I was walking to my truck, and the next I was being dragged across the gravel toward a van I hadn't even noticed parked at the edge of the lot. The younger one got the door open. They threw me inside. I hit the metal floor with my shoulder and I heard the door slam. And then we were moving. I want to stop and tell you something about fear, about what it actually does to a person. People think fear makes you scream, or beg, or fight, and maybe it does for some people. But for me that night fear made me very quiet, very still. My brain went somewhere cold and clean and it started counting things. The number of turns the van was taking. Left, right, left, left. The smell inside, gasoline, cigarettes, something sweet underneath like old fruit. The voices of the men up front. They weren't talking much. The tall one was driving. The heavier one was in the passenger seat. The younger one was in the back with me. He had a pistol in his lap. He kept looking down at me and then looking away like he didn't want to make eye contact. I remember thinking, he's scared too. He's not used to this. That was the only thing that gave me hope, even just a flicker of it. We drove for maybe 40 minutes. I tried to keep track. We left pavement at some point. I felt the road change, the tires biting gravel and then dirt. Then the road got worse, branches scraping the sides of the van, the smell of pine getting stronger. I knew where we were going, more or less. There's only one place that road leads, up into the national forest, into the long stretch of pine country where the logging trails wind through valleys and dead ends. Nobody goes up there in February. Nobody. That's when I understood what was about to happen. They hadn't taken my wallet. They hadn't taken my keys. They weren't robbing me. They were going somewhere to kill me. The van stopped. The tall one got out first. He opened the back doors and the cold came in like a hand reaching for my throat. The younger one shoved me toward the opening. I tried to slow him down, tried to make my legs go heavy, but the heavier one grabbed my ankles and they pulled me out and I hit the ground on my hip. They didn't say a word. That's the part that still gets me even now. They didn't say a single word to me the entire time. Not why, not who sent them, not what I'd done. They just kept moving like this was a job they'd done before and would do again. The tall one had a flashlight. He shone it into the trees and I saw them, a stand of old pines, thick and close together with a clearing in the middle. There was already a shovel leaning against one of the trunks. They'd been here before. They'd prepared. That detail almost broke me. The shovel, just standing there, waiting like it knew I was coming. They dragged me into the clearing. The younger one pulled the tape off my mouth, hard enough that it took some of my lip with it. I tasted blood again. I tried to speak. I tried to ask why. The tall one looked at me. He had eyes like wet pebbles, flat, empty. "Wrong place, wrong time," he said. That's all, 6 words. Then he raised the pistol. I closed my eyes. I'm not ashamed to say it. I closed my eyes because I didn't want the last thing I ever saw to be his face. The shot was louder than I expected. I felt the bullet enter just below my collarbone. It felt like being hit with a sledgehammer wrapped in fire. The force of it spun me halfway around, and I went down into the snow on my side. I heard them talking then. The first words I'd heard them say to each other in over an hour. She's still moving. Bleeding out, 2 minutes tops. Just leave her, ground's frozen anyway. The younger one said something I couldn't make out. The tall one laughed. He actually laughed. And then he kicked snow and dirt across my face, the way you'd cover a hole you didn't feel like filling all the way. I heard the van door slam. I heard the engine start. I heard them drive away. And then there was only the wind. I don't know how long I lay there. The cold was the strange part. At first it was the worst pain I'd ever felt, worse than the bullet, even. My fingers went numb in minutes. My face froze where the snow had been kicked across it. I couldn't feel my legs. But then after a while the cold started to feel almost warm. That's how you know you're dying, by the way, when the cold starts feeling warm. I'd learned that in survival training. Hypothermia, 3rd stage. The body gives up on protecting itself and starts shutting down systems to save the heart. I was bleeding. I could feel it under me, a wet warmth spreading into the snow. I should have died there. By every measure I know of, I should have died in that clearing. The bullet had gone through the meat under my collarbone and out my back. I was 40 miles from town. The temperature was somewhere around 8 degrees Fahrenheit. I was alone. But something kept me awake. I want to be honest with you. I don't know if it was anger or stubbornness or just the dumb, animal refusal of a body that didn't want to quit. I don't believe in signs. I don't believe in destiny. I just know that when my eyes started to close, something inside me said, not yet. And I rolled over. It took everything I had. I rolled onto my stomach. I got one knee under me, then the other. The pain was so big it had stopped being pain. It was just a thing, like the cold, like the dark, something to move through. I started crawling. I don't remember most of it. I remember the smell of pine sap. I remember my hand going through the crust of the snow and my fingers brushing something that felt like a root. I remember the moon coming out. There was a moon by then, half full, and the light on the snow being so blue it almost looked like water. I crawled for what I later figured out was about a quarter mile. Just a quarter mile in 3 hours. And then I saw the cabin. I want to tell you about Henrik Bone now, because without him there is no rest of this story. Henrik was 67 years old that winter. He'd been a Marine in Vietnam, a fact he never talked about. After the war he worked for the Forest Service for 31 years. And when he retired, he built a small cabin on a leased plot of land about 2 miles off the main logging road. He lived there alone, except for an old hound named Brisket and a stove that he fed with split birch. I didn't know any of this when I crawled up to his porch. I didn't even know there was a cabin until I saw the orange glow in one of the windows. I tried to call out. My voice was gone. The cold had taken it. All I could do was scrape at the bottom of the door with my fingernails. I heard the dog first, a low, slow bark deep in the chest. Then footsteps. The door opened, and Henrik stood there in a wool shirt and long underwear, with a kerosene lamp in one hand and a lever-action rifle in the other. He looked down at me. I looked up at him. I couldn't speak. I just lifted one hand a few inches off the boards of the porch. He set the lamp down. He set the rifle down. He knelt next to me, and I will never, as long as I live, forget what he said. "Easy now, young lady, easy. I've got you, you're home." I lost consciousness then, for real this time, the kind of black that has no dreams in it. What I learned later was this. Henrik carried me inside. He weighed maybe 160 soaking wet, and I was 140 pounds of dead weight, and he carried me anyway. He cut my coat off me with a pair of kitchen scissors. He saw the bullet wound. He didn't panic. He'd been a Navy corpsman, the thing he never talked about. He had a medical kit in his cabin that would have put some small clinics to shame. He cleaned the wound. He packed it. He started an IV from a saline bag he kept for his own use, because at his age, his legs cramped if he didn't drink enough water in the dry months. He stitched the entry and exit holes. He wrapped me in 3 wool blankets and put me by the stove. He did not call for help. That part is important. He did not call anyone. Because there were 2 things Henrik figured out within about 5 minutes of looking at me. 1, that whoever did this thought I was dead. And 2, that the closest hospital was over an hour away on roads that wouldn't be plowed until morning, and a wound like mine needed warmth and stillness more than it needed a bumpy ride in a sheriff's truck. He also figured out a 3rd thing, which he told me later, after I woke up. He figured out that whoever did this might come back, if they heard I'd survived, if word got out. So he didn't tell anyone. For 3 weeks, the world thought I was missing. I woke up on the 4th day. The cabin was warm. The stove was crackling. There was a smell of something cooking, broth, I think, with onions and meat. I could hear the wind outside and the wood walls creaking, and the slow, heavy breathing of the dog Brisket, who was lying beside me on the floor. I tried to sit up. I couldn't. Henrik came in from the other room. He didn't smile. He didn't look surprised. He just nodded like he'd been expecting me to wake up at exactly this moment. "You've been gone 4 days," he said. "How's the pain?" I tried to answer. My voice was a whisper. "Bad." "That'll be the case for a while." He pulled a chair over and sat down. "I'm going to ask you some questions. You answer if you can, otherwise just blink. 1 for yes, 2 for no." I nodded. "Was it 3 men?" I blinked once. "Did they shoot you?" 1 blink. "Do you know why?" 2 blinks, no. "Did you recognize any of them?" 2 blinks. He nodded slowly. He looked at the stove for a long time. When he turned back, his face was the same calm it had been since the moment he opened the door. "All right then," he said. "Here's what we're going to do." And then he told me his plan. Henrik's plan was simple. It was also, in a quiet way, the most patient thing anyone has ever done for me. He would tell no one I was alive. Not the sheriff. Not the neighbors. Not even his own brother who lived 2 counties south. As far as the world was concerned, Raina Olsen had walked out of McAllister's bar on a Wednesday night and never come home. My truck was still in the parking lot. My dog Junie was still at the house, scratching at the door, until somebody, it turned out to be Bill Hanrahan, finally let her out and took her home with him. The town searched for me. For a few days anyway. The sheriff's deputies drove the back roads. A volunteer group from the VFW walked some of the closer trails. They found nothing, because the men who shot me had driven me 40 miles into a place no one was going to think to look in February. After about 10 days, the search wound down. People started saying she probably ran off. People said maybe she couldn't handle her mother's death. People said maybe she went back to the army or down to her cousin's place in Phoenix or just away. Small towns have a way of writing stories about people when they disappear. The stories are almost never true, but they're convenient. They let people stop worrying. Henrik knew all this. He listened to the talk on his old crank radio. He drove into town once a week for supplies, the way he always had, and he came back with information. He told me what the sheriff was saying. He told me what people at the diner were guessing. He told me what they'd printed in the weekly paper. And he never, not once, said a word about me. Healing is slow when you have a bullet wound and no doctor. Henrik kept me on his back room cot for almost 3 weeks. The first week I could barely move. The second week I could sit up and feed myself. The third week I could walk to the porch. He fed me well. Real food. Elk stew from a deer he'd shot in November. Sourdough bread he baked in a cast-iron Dutch oven. Eggs from the chickens he kept in a small heated coop behind the cabin. He gave me black coffee in the mornings with honey because he said the sugar would help me keep weight on. He didn't talk much. Neither did I. We were both people who'd learned, somewhere in our lives, that silence wasn't something to be filled. It was something to be respected. But sometimes in the evenings, he'd sit by the stove and tell me things. He told me about Vietnam in pieces. Never the bad parts, just the small things, the smell of rain in the jungle, a monkey that used to steal cigarettes from a guy in his unit, the taste of warm Coca-Cola in a glass bottle. He told me about his wife, who died of a stroke 12 years before. He told me about the cabin, and how he'd built every wall of it himself in the summer of 1989, after he retired. I told him about my mother, about the army, about the 2 tour and the things I'd seen and the way I'd come home and just felt nothing for a long time. I told him about Junie. I cried about Junie, actually, because I missed her, and Henrik just sat there and let me cry without trying to make me stop. After I'd been there about 2 weeks, I asked him why he was doing this. He looked at the fire for a long time before he answered. Because somebody did it for me once, he said, in a place a lot colder and a lot meaner than this one, and I never got to pay it back to him, so I'm paying it back to you. That was the only time we talked about why. The first time I held a rifle again was the start of the 4th week. Henrik had a workshop behind the cabin, a small shed 12 by 12 with a workbench and a row of cabinets and a small wood stove of its own. He kept his firearms in there, not many. He wasn't a collector, but what he had was good. He brought out 3 rifles and laid them on the bench. He didn't say anything. He just stepped back and watched me. I knew what he was doing. He was checking. He wanted to see what kind of person I was when I had a weapon in my hand again. I picked up the first one, a bolt-action .3006, heavy, older than I was. The wood stock was worn smooth from decades of use. I checked the chamber. I worked the bolt. I looked down the iron sights at a knot in the far wall. I set it down. I picked up the second, a Marlin .22, the kind you'd use for small game. Light, easy. I checked it, set it down. I picked up the third. It was a Winchester Model 70, chambered in .308, mounted scope, sling. The stock had been replaced at some point with a synthetic one, and the bluing on the barrel was worn near the muzzle, the way it gets when a rifle has been carried a lot. Not just shot, carried. I held it for a long time. That one's yours if you want it, Henrik said. I looked at him. I'm not asking what you're going to do, he said. I'm not asking you to tell me anything, but I think you came to my door for a reason, and I think you're going to leave for a reason too, and I'd rather you leave with the right tool than the wrong one. I didn't answer right away. I held the rifle. I felt the weight of it, the balance. What do you want in return? I finally asked. He shook his head. Nothing, just promise me one thing. What? If you survive whatever you're going to do, you come back here, and you tell me about it, so I know you made it. I promised him. I never broke that promise. The next week we started training. I want to be clear about something. I'd been in the army, I knew how to shoot. I was, in fact, a better shot than most of the men I'd served with. I'd qualified expert with the M4 every time I went through the range, and I'd done a lot of long-range work in my 2nd tour, mostly in cover positions for patrols. I wasn't a sniper, but I knew the work. What I didn't have anymore was my body. 3 weeks of lying on a cot had cost me almost all my conditioning. The bullet wound was healing, but my left arm wouldn't lift above shoulder height without pain. My ribs still hurt when I breathed deep. I was 20 pounds lighter than I'd been in November. So that's what we worked on, the body first. Henrik had me carrying split wood every morning in increasing loads. He had me walking first to the end of the driveway, then to the gate, then a 1/4 mile down the logging road, then a 1/2 mile, then a full mile. He had me shooting from a rest, then from a kneel, then from a standing position. He never pushed. He never raised his voice. He just watched, and when I was ready for more, he gave me more. By the end of the 5th week, I could carry a 60-pound pack for 2 hours without stopping. By the end of the 6th week, I was hitting a paper plate at 300 yards, standing. By the end of the 7th week, I was ready. I want to tell you about the men I was hunting now, because by this point, I knew who they were. Henrik had been gathering information for me, slowly and carefully, on his weekly trips into town. He never asked direct questions. He just listened. And what he heard over those weeks was that a crew of 3 out-of-towners had been seen at McAllister's on the night I disappeared. Nobody had thought much of it at the time, but now, in hindsight, people remembered. A trucker had seen a black panel van leaving the parking lot that night. He remembered because it had no plates. He'd mentioned it to the sheriff. The sheriff had filed it away. A waitress at the diner had served 3 men coffee the morning after, at the truck stop out by the interstate. She remembered them because they paid in cash and didn't tip, and because one of them, the tall one with the scar, had said something to her that made her uncomfortable. She told her boss, and her boss told a friend, and the friend told someone at the feed store, and eventually it came back to Henrik. It took us about 3 weeks to piece it together. The men weren't random. They were a crew. They worked for a man named Vance Roch, who ran a contracting operation out of a town called Drennan, about 90 miles south. Roch wasn't a contractor. Not really. He had a few legitimate jobs on the books, but his actual business was something else. He was the kind of man people went to when they had a problem that couldn't be solved legally. The kind of man who knew people, who had crews, who took jobs and didn't ask questions. I never figured out completely why he'd been hired to kill me. I have a theory. My mother in her last months had been in a long, slow legal fight with a developer who wanted to buy our land. Pine Hollow Road sat at the edge of a parcel that someone wanted for a hunting lodge. Mom had refused to sell. She'd refused so loud and so often that the local paper had written about it. After she died, the land passed to me. I think someone wanted me out of the way before I could refuse to. I think that's why 3 men I'd never seen before drove me into the woods on a Wednesday night. But I'm not certain. I'll never be certain. And in the end, the why mattered less to me than the who. There were 4 of them all told, the 3 who took me and Roch himself. Henrik and I sat at the kitchen table one night in late March and drew out a map. Drennan was a small town, smaller than Caribou Ridge. Roch's place was on the south side, a long, low ranch house with a barn out back and a high chain-link fence. The 3 men who worked for him lived close by, one in a trailer on the property, one in an apartment over the auto parts store on Main Street, one in a small house on the edge of town. I'd been to Drennan once when I was a kid. I barely remembered it, but Henrik had been there many times over the years. He drew the streets from memory. We didn't talk about what I was going to do, not exactly. We talked about getting in, getting out, and the routes between places. We talked about timing. We talked about weather. I told him I didn't want to involve him. I told him this was my mess. He looked at me across the table and said, "I'm not going with you, but I'm going to drive you to the county line, and I'm going to drive you back, and anything that happens in between is yours." I tried to argue. He put his hand on the table, palm down, and that was the end of it. The night I left was the last night of March. There was a heavy fog that evening, the kind that comes when the snow starts melting and the warm air hits the cold ground. Visibility was maybe 20 feet. Henrik said it was a good night for what I needed to do. The fog would make me hard to see and hard to follow. I packed the Winchester, a pistol he'd given me, a .45 with a worn grip, a pack with 2 days of food, water, a small medical kit, a knife, a length of paracord, a wool watch cap, gloves, and a black jacket he'd cut down to fit me. I dressed in dark clothes. I tied my hair up. I looked in the small mirror over his wash basin, and the woman who looked back at me wasn't the one who'd walked into McAllister's 7 weeks before. She was thinner, harder. Her cheekbones stood out. There was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. I didn't recognize her completely, but I knew her. Henrik drove me down the logging road in his old pickup. We didn't talk. He stopped at the county line, just past a bridge over a frozen creek. "I'll be here in 2 nights," he said. "Same time. If you're not here by sunrise the second morning, I'm going to assume you didn't make it, and I'm going to drive home alone." "Understood." He looked at me for a long moment. "Don't get caught, Raina. Whatever else happens, don't get caught." I nodded. I got out of the truck. I walked into the fog. I want to describe what it's like to do what I did. Not the details, just the feeling. People who haven't been to war think there's a moment when you decide to hurt someone. A switch you flip. A line you cross. They imagine it must feel like something, guilt, or rage, or some big terrible feeling that takes you over. That's not how it works. When I walked into the fog that night, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even afraid, really. I was something else. I was quiet. I was a person who had been counted as dead and had decided not to be dead, and I was going to do what needed to be done, and then I was going to come back. That was the whole of it. That was the whole feeling. I'd walked a long way before I started thinking of myself differently. I'd been Raina Olsen, daughter, soldier, neighbor. And then for a few weeks I'd been a ghost, lying in the snow, lying on a cot, lying low in a cabin in the woods. And now I was something else. A returner, that's the word I came up with. I was someone who was coming back. The first man I found was the younger one, the one with the baseball cap. His name was Tyler Madsen. He was 24 years old. He lived in a small house on the east edge of Drennan, on a street called Larch Lane, in a rental that he shared with a girlfriend who worked nights at a gas station 30 miles away. I knew her schedule because I'd been watching the house for 2 days. I'd hiked in the night before, made a hide in the tree line behind his property, and watched. She left for work at 9 in the evening. He stayed home. He drank beer. He watched TV. At about 11, he came out onto the back porch to smoke. He always smoked at 11. He always smoked alone. I'd been waiting for that. I came out of the trees as he was lighting his cigarette. He didn't see me until I was 5 feet away. By then I had the rifle on him, and his hands went up automatically, the cigarette still in his mouth. He recognized me. I saw it happen. I saw his eyes go wide. I saw his mouth open around the cigarette. He took a step back. "You're dead," he whispered. "Not yet," I said. "I'm not going to tell you exactly what happened next, not because I'm ashamed of it, because it's not the kind of thing you describe, but I will tell you this. I didn't kill him. I came close. The rifle was up. My finger was on the trigger. I had every reason in the world. I had every right. But I looked at him, at his pale, scared face, at his hands shaking in the cold air, at the cigarette that had fallen out of his mouth and was smoldering on the porch boards, and I remembered something. I remembered him in the van. I remembered him not making eye contact. I remembered the way he'd looked at the floor while the other two laughed. He'd been the one who pulled the tape off my mouth hard. He was guilty. He was part of it. But he wasn't the worst of them. So I made him a different kind of deal. I made Tyler Madsen tell me everything. I sat him down in his own kitchen, at his own table, with the rifle across my knees and a pot of his coffee on the stove. I let him smoke. I let him talk. I asked him questions, and he answered every single one in detail, with the kind of fast, desperate honesty that only comes from a man who knows he is one wrong word from the end of his life. He told me who'd hired Roch. He told me how much they'd been paid. He told me where Roch kept his money. He told me where the other 2 men lived in case I didn't already know I did, but the confirmation mattered. He told me about other jobs they'd done, 2 other people they'd hurt, 1 person they'd killed. That last one I made him repeat, twice. He was crying by the end, actually crying. I don't think he was crying out of remorse exactly. I think he was crying because he was 24 years old and he understood, maybe for the first time, that he had become someone he hadn't planned to become. When he was done, I took out a small notebook from my pack and I wrote down everything he'd said. Names, dates, places, every detail I could get. Then I made him sign it. Then I told him to leave. I told him to get in his truck right then that night and to drive. I didn't care where. South. East. I told him if he ever came back to this state, or if he ever contacted Roch, or if he ever did this kind of work again for the rest of his life, I would find him. And I told him that I had been a ghost once already, and I knew how to be one again. He left. I watched him go from the porch. His tail lights faded into the fog. I never saw Tyler Madsen again. I heard years later that he ended up in a town in Oregon working on a fishing boat. I heard he got married. I heard he had a kid. I don't know if any of that is true. I hope it is. I hope he became someone different. I hope he kept his promise. I kept mine. The second man was harder. His name was Cal Brennan. He was the heavier one, the one with the flat face and the quiet eyes, the one who had kicked me in the ribs and broken them. He lived in the apartment over the auto parts store on Main Street, and he didn't have a girlfriend, and he didn't smoke on porches, and he kept odd hours. I watched his place for almost a full day from the roof of the building across the street. I'd climbed up there at 2 in the morning using a fire escape, and I'd brought a tarp and water and food, and I'd settled in. Cal Brennan went out twice, once to a diner where he ate alone, once to the bar attached to the diner where he drank alone. He talked to no one. He met no one. He came back to his apartment both times by the same route, walking with his hands in his pockets, scanning the street the way a man scans the street when he knows people might want to find him. He was waiting for something. I think, and this is just my guess, that Tyler had managed to get a message to him before he left town, or maybe Roch had picked up on something. Maybe Tyler's truck being gone from his usual spot had been noticed. I don't know. But Cal Brennan was on alert, and that made him dangerous. I had to do this differently. I didn't confront Cal Brennan. I went into his apartment at 3 in the morning, while he was sleeping. Through a kitchen window I'd watched him leave unlocked for 2 nights in a row. He had a gun under his pillow. I knew this because I'd watched him put it there. He had another gun in a holster on the back of the bathroom door. I knew this because I'd watched him take it off when he came home. He didn't have a gun anywhere else. I went in quiet, boots off, just socks on the linoleum. I took his gun from under his pillow first. He didn't even shift. I took the one off the bathroom door. I took a long combat knife I found in a drawer. I unloaded all of them, and I put the ammunition in a plastic bag in my pack. I left the empty weapons on the kitchen table. Then I sat down in the chair across from his bed, and I waited. He woke up around 6. He saw me before he saw anything else. His hand went under the pillow. It came back empty. He froze. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. I had the Winchester across my knees again. I had the pistol on the table beside me. I had a thermos of coffee, his coffee, made from his beans while he slept. He didn't try to run. He was smarter than Tyler. He saw the empty gun on the kitchen table, and he understood what was happening. How, he said, not a question, a statement. He was trying to make sense of me. It doesn't matter how. He nodded slowly. He sat up against the headboard. He was a big man, soft around the middle, with thinning hair and the kind of face that looked younger when he was tired. You came alone. Yes. You're not police. No. He let out a breath. He almost looked relieved. Police would have been a problem he couldn't solve. I was a problem he could at least try to talk to. What do you want? I told him. I wanted to know everything Roch had done. Not just to me, everything. I wanted names of people they'd worked for. I wanted dates. I wanted bank accounts. I wanted the location of any evidence Roch might have kept. I wanted to know if there were other crews, other jobs. I told him if he gave me all of that completely, I would walk out of his apartment and he would never see me again. I told him if he lied, even once I would know. He stared at me for a long time. Then he started talking. Cal Brennan talked for almost 3 hours. He smoked the whole time, one cigarette after another, and he drank his coffee, and he told me things I had not expected to hear. He told me about jobs going back almost a decade. He told me about a state senator who had once paid Roch to threaten a journalist. He told me about a businessman in another county who had paid to have a competitor's warehouse burned down. He told me about a woman named Patricia Henley who had hired Roch to find out who her husband was sleeping with, and how that job had ended with a man being beaten so badly he never walked right again. He told me about my mother's case. He told me the developer, a man named Howard Lynn, who lived in a gated subdivision 200 miles south, had paid Roch $80,000 for the job. The job being me. The job being making sure that the land at the end of Pine Hollow Road came onto the market within 6 months. He told me about Tyler. He told me about himself. He told me about Merck, the tall one with the scar, the one who had pulled the trigger. He told me where Roch lived. He told me Roch's routines. He told me Roch kept a safe in his bedroom closet behind a panel in the wall, and he told me the combination, because Roch had once been drunk and bragged about it. I wrote it all down. I made him sign each page. When he was done, he sat there waiting. He didn't know what I was going to do. He thought, I think, that I was going to kill him anyway. I didn't. I picked up his unloaded weapons. I picked up my notebook. I put on my boots. I walked to the door. I turned back at the doorway. Cal, I said, you have one chance, same as Tyler. Get out. Leave Drennan, leave this state. Don't ever come back. Don't ever do this kind of work again. If I hear that you have, I will come for you, and the next visit will not look like this one. He nodded once. I walked out. I never saw Cal Brennan again either. I heard much later that he died of a heart attack in a motel room in Nevada in 2022. I don't feel anything about that one way or the other. He made his choice. He had 3 years to live a different life. I hope he tried. Merck was different. I want you to understand something before I tell you about that night. I had not gone into this wanting blood. I know that sounds strange after everything I've just told you. I had gone into it wanting answers, wanting accountability, wanting whoever had done this to actually know in their bones that they hadn't gotten away with it. But Merck was different. Merck had laughed when he kicked dirt on my face. Merck had pulled the trigger. Merck was the kind of man who had done this many times to many people and would do it many more times if he was allowed to. Cal had told me about him. Cal had been afraid of him. Cal had said more than once that he thought Merck enjoyed it. I had not come to Drennan to kill anyone, but by the time I walked into the woods behind Vance Roch's property on the second night, I had stopped pretending that no one would die. Roch's property was harder to get into than I'd expected. He had 2 dogs, big dogs, not pets, working dogs trained to attack. He had a chain-link fence around the back with razor wire on top. He had floodlights on motion sensors. He had 2 security cameras on the back of the house that I could see from the tree line, and probably more I couldn't. I'd watched the place for most of a day. I'd seen Merck come and go twice. He was staying with Roch, sleeping in a back bedroom. Cal had told me that part. The fog had cleared by the second night. The moon was almost full. Not ideal conditions, but I didn't have time to wait for another dark night. Henrik was meeting me at the county line at sunrise. I went in through a gap in the fence at the back corner of the property, where the chain link had pulled away from a fence post. I'd found it the day before. The dogs were in a kennel by the barn. I could hear them, but I didn't see them. The motion lights were a problem. I solved them with patience. You move slow enough, the sensors don't trip. I moved across the backyard at a speed that would have looked absurd to anyone watching 6 inches at a time, then a pause, then 6 more. It took me 40 minutes to cover 30 feet. I got to the side of the house. The bedroom window, the one Cal had told me was Merck's, was open about 3 inches. I waited there for almost an hour, listening. I heard him breathing inside. I'm not going to tell you what happened in that room. I'm sorry. I know you've come this far and I know you want to know, but there are some things you don't talk about, not because you're hiding them, because saying them out loud makes them happen all over again, and I've already lived through them once. What I will tell you is this. Merck did not die in his sleep. He woke up. He saw me. He understood. And he had the chance in his last moments to know exactly who I was and exactly why I was there. I made sure of that. When it was done, I went to Roch's bedroom. Vance Roch was a small man, smaller than I expected. He was in his late 50s, with thin gray hair and reading glasses on the nightstand and a wife asleep in the bed next to him. The wife mattered. The wife was the one thing I hadn't planned for, and the one thing that changed what I did next. I didn't touch his wife. I never touched his wife. I put my hand over Roch's mouth and I woke him up. I put the rifle barrel against the side of his head. I told him in a whisper that if he made a sound that woke his wife, she would see what happened next, and he would not want that. He understood. I made him get up. I made him walk in his pajamas out of the bedroom and down the hallway and into the kitchen. I made him sit at the kitchen table. And then I did the thing I had come to do. I am not going to tell you what I did to Vance Roch. I will tell you he lived. That part is important. He lived. I did not kill him. I had decided, somewhere on the walk to his property, that I would not kill him. Killing him would have been too easy. Killing him would have ended his story. I wanted his story to keep going, but to be a different story than the one he'd been living. I made him write a letter, several letters actually, to people he had wronged, to the families of people he had hurt. I made him include the names, the dates, the amounts. I made him sign a confession, a long one, detailed. I took photographs of everything with a small camera I'd brought. Then I opened the safe in his closet, using the combination Cal had given me. There was almost $200,000 in cash inside, along with a number of items, a ledger, some photographs, documents that I took. I took the money. I'm not going to apologize for that. I gave most of it away over the next few years to people who needed it more than I did. Some of it went to a woman in another county whose son had been hurt by Roch's crew. Some of it went to a charity for veterans. Some of it went to Henrik, who refused it, and so I put it in an envelope and hid it in his wood pile, and he found it eventually and never mentioned it. I left Roch alive at his kitchen table. I left the confession on the table next to him. I left a copy of everything Tyler and Cal had told me, all the names, all the dates. And I left a note, just 3 lines. You sent men to kill me in the woods. I came back. Don't make me come back again. I walked out the way I came in. I walked through the trees. I walked 4 miles to the road where Henrik was waiting in his pickup. The sun was coming up over the ridge. I got in the truck. I closed the door. I didn't say anything. Henrik looked at me for a long moment. He didn't ask. He just put the truck in gear and turned it around and drove. Vance Roch went to prison. It took a few months. I had mailed copies of the confession and the photographs and the documents to the state attorney general's office, to the FBI, and to 3 different newspapers. I had used an anonymous mailbox in a city 2 states away. I had worn gloves the whole time I'd handled any of it. The investigation that followed brought down not just Roch but a number of the people he'd worked for, including Howard Lynn, the developer who had paid for me. Lynn got 6 years. Roch got 28. There were others, 6 others, all told, who got smaller sentences for smaller crimes that came to light in the wake of the investigation. I watched it all from a distance. Nobody ever came looking for me. I think the sheriff in Caribou Ridge had his suspicions. I think when I finally came back to town in late April with a story about having gone to stay with a cousin in another state to grieve, he didn't quite believe me. But he didn't push. I think part of him was just glad to see me alive. And I think part of him, when he later read the news, put some things together and decided he didn't want to know. I went back to Henrik's cabin many times over the next few years. I kept my promise. I came back. I told him about everything that happened after, and he listened, and he never judged me, and he never asked me to feel guilty for the parts I might have done wrong. He died in the spring of 2023 in his sleep at the cabin he'd built with his own hands. I was the one who found him. I'd driven up that morning to bring him some books he'd asked for. The stove was cold. Brisket was lying next to his bed. I buried him on his own land the way he'd asked me to. I dug the hole myself. It took me most of a day. Because the ground was still half frozen, I marked the spot with a stone I'd carried up from the creek. I took Brisket home with me. He died 8 months later of old age on a porch in the sun. I'm 43 years old now. I still live on Pine Hollow Road. I never sold the house. I rebuilt parts of it over the years, a new roof, a bigger porch, a small workshop in the backyard. I have 2 dogs now, a new one and another rescue. I have a small business. I'm good. I'm okay. I'm a person again. But I am not the same person I was before that night in February. I want to tell anyone who hears this story something important. What I did was not righteous. I want to be clear about that. I am not telling you this story to be admired. I broke laws. I hurt people. I took money that wasn't mine. I made decisions in those woods and in that kitchen and on that fence line that I will carry for the rest of my life. Some nights I sleep. Some nights I don't. But I also want you to know this. There are people in this world who will count you as dead before they have finished burying you. They will look at you in the snow and decide you don't matter. They will laugh when they kick dirt on your face. They will get in their van and drive home, and they will eat breakfast the next morning, and they will not think about you at all. You do not owe those people anything. You don't owe them your forgiveness. You don't owe them your silence. You don't owe them the polite, civilized version of justice that they did not extend to you. What you owe yourself when something like that happens is to come back. Come back any way you can. Come back changed. Come back smaller or harder or stranger than you were before. Come back wrong even if that's what it takes. Just come back. Because the world is full of people who were left for dead in some clearing somewhere, and most of them never made it back. And the only thing worse than what happened to them is that no one ever heard about it. I came back. And on a cold night in February, in a kitchen that smelled like cigarettes and old coffee, a man who had laughed while he buried me looked across a table and understood, finally and completely, that some women do not stay in the ground.